Okay, thank you. Colleagues, if we can find our seats, please, we'll call this next panel to order. We have 6 witnesses here, again, to discuss Bill C-10, the budget bill. And I'll ask them to present in the order that I list them. First of all, we have le Conseil national des chômeurs et chômeuses. We have Canada Health Infoway. We have the Canadian Labour Congress. We have the Canadian Urban Transit Association. We have the Association of Canadian Community Colleges, and we have the Conference Board of Canada. So we have an hour and a half for this session, so if we can ask that your presentations be no more than 5 minutes long, and then at the end of the presentation we'll go to questions by members. So I believe it's Monsieur Sarret will begin with his presentation. Monsieur Sarret.
Excusez-moi.
Votre présentation.
Pardon me. Of course. I'm sorry, I was just getting ready. You have 5 minutes to make your opening statement. Mr. Chairman, members of this committee, on behalf of our organization, the Conseil national des chômeurs, the National Council of the Unemployed, I wish to thank you for this invitation. I'm here to share our viewpoint on Part 4 of Bill C-10, dealing with government proposals relative to employment insurance, which can be found on page 223. Must I tell you that we are not at all surprised to encounter sections in 227 and 228 dealing with retroactive setting of the contribution rate for years 2002, 2003, and 2005 following the December 11, 2008 Supreme Court decision concerning the surplus from the Employment Insurance Fund. However, I want to assert one thing. The plan measures intended to offer employment insurance assistance for workers who lose and will lose their jobs, for all practical purposes, are insignificant. They are insignificant in the current context of the economic recession and completely out of touch with measures put in place by other countries. The International Monetary Fund, in a document made public on December 20, 2008 and entitled Fiscal Policy for the Crisis, urges various governments to extend their unemployment insurance, particularly towards the duration of benefits, eligibility to benefits, and the size of benefits, as this constitutes one of the key measures to effectively face the economic crisis. As early as last week, Mr. Chair, the French government followed these recommendations and decided to not only prolong the duration of the benefit period, but it also decided to increase the benefit rate from 60 to 75% of salary. The Obama plan in the United States clearly states that eligibility to unemployment insurance must be improved. Extending employment insurance is one of the most effective methods in fighting the global economic crisis. Each dollar invested in unemployment insurance yields a fallback of $1.73 for the economy. What is the Canadian government doing in reaction to the net loss in a single month when 129,000 jobs were lost, something that had not been seen since 1976? What is our government doing while the Canadian unemployment rate jumped 10% to reach 7.2%? What is our government doing while the Toronto Dominion Bank predicts that unemployment will reach 8.8% by the end of this year? Well, our government shyly announces the renewal of a pre-existing pilot project. The difference being that this pilot project labeled number 10, and that extends the period of benefits for an additional 5 weeks. It's being made available to all administrative regions in Canada and will enable, in a few rare cases, up to 50 weeks of benefits. So again, the cases are very rare. Mr. Chair, there is no cause for celebration. Nothing is being done to come to the aid of the first victims of unemployment. People in situations of precarious employment, for example, those working part-time, and others who will not qualify for unemployment insurance, for the most part. Eligibility to the employment insurance program has been restricted to such a point that in 2006, coverage was 46.1%. This number is established by taking the ratio of recipients to unemployed persons and indicates that for every 1,000 unemployed persons, only 461 have access to employment insurance. This number comes from the official data published by Human Resources and Skills Development Canada, as recent as last year. The Human Resources Minister, Ms. Diane Finley, disagrees with this data and prefers to use a new calculation method that defines, in typical Orwellian language, that eligibility rate for all unemployed individuals with a recent job separation that qualified under the EI program. In other words, Chapter 5 of the report. This rate indicates that coverage in 2006 was of 82.7% for the applicants who qualified under the EI program as a whole. Those who quote-unquote do not qualify were not taken into account into this statistic. This game of number twisting must end. Individuals are losing their jobs, and there will be more people who will lose their jobs. We need to secure economic safety for these people and their families. That in itself is the very role of the employment insurance program. It's also the role of responsible government to ensure the well-being of its population. Mr. Chair, there's a strong and widespread social consensus calling for a relaxation of eligibility rules of the employment insurance program. This is why we believe that our government must modify Part 4 of the Bill of Implementation for the 2009 budget by adding orientations to that effect. Thank you. I think I deserve a medal because I was able to sum up my opinion in 5 minutes.
You did exactly 5 minutes. Thank you. Merci, Monsieur Serret. We'll now go to Mr. Alvarez, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Richard Alvarez. I'm the President and CEO of Canada Health Infoway. I have with me Mr. Sheridan, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the corporation. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to begin by thanking you and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak with you today about the federal government's recent budget allocation of $500 million to Canada Health Infoway. I know I speak for everybody at Canada Health Infoway, and quite frankly, as well as our territories and provincial partners, in expressing our appreciation for the government's continued support for the development of Canada's electronic health record system. As you may know, our jurisdictional partners, as well as Canada's national healthcare associations, contributed to a pre-budget consultation process. They were extremely supportive of the move to modernize Canada's health information systems. So I want to thank our colleagues in the healthcare field for making the case for investment, but in particular I'd like to thank the federal government for listening and responding in such a positive manner. The question is, why was it so important an undertaking for so many in the healthcare field? As I see it, there are really two primary reasons. First, there's the compelling case for associated healthcare benefits, and secondly, a large range of economic benefits. Among the many crucial and lasting benefits of electronic health record systems is the potentially life-saving advantage of healthcare professionals having access to critical health information of every Canadian patient. These systems will not only provide doctors and other healthcare providers with much-needed information about the patient, but enable better decisions around diagnosis and treatments that result in the quality of care and greater efficiencies across the healthcare system. We're very proud of our collaborative work with Canada's territories and provinces, work that's absolutely essential to ensuring a legacy of healthcare distinguished by accessibility, quality, and productivity of future generations. But as I've said, the benefits go beyond healthcare to economic benefits. In 2009, we asked the Conference Board of Canada to explore economic benefits associated with our investments. What in fact they found is that for every dollar Infoway and its jurisdictional partners invested in electronic health record programs, an additional $1.34 is added to the overall GDP. For every $100 million invested in e-health initiatives, an estimated 1,500 jobs will be created or maintained, with half of these being knowledge-based information technology positions. And for every $100 million invested in e-health initiatives, an estimated $42 million in corporate pre-tax profits is generated. Now, with the federal government's additional financial support for Infoway, Canadians will see the continued modernization of healthcare as well as the economic stimulus of these investments over the next 2 years, which is particularly important in these challenging times. We've come a long way in building the EHR, electronic health record systems across Canada. In working with our jurisdictional partners, we have established significant momentum that's resulted in 276 projects that are either completed or underway across the country, with projects in every territory and province. InfoWave's commitment, it really has committed nearly all of the $1.6 billion it received in funding from the Government of Canada to the end of 2008, an amount that is really matched by the jurisdictions. And it really has put the country well on its way to implementing the core systems comprising of the EHR Foundation in Canada. Yet much remains to be done to complete this $10 billion initiative, an initiative that will not only modernize our healthcare system, but will ensure returns between $6 and $7 billion to the health system annually. With the government's most recent funding allocation, we can continue to build on our momentum and move towards our ultimate goal, a pan-Canadian electronic health record system that will result in faster diagnosis, improved patient care, connected physicians, nurses, pharmacists, quality care for remote patients. I assure you we intend to put this funding to very good use in short order towards this goal while creating and maintaining thousands of knowledge-based jobs throughout Canada. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Alvarez. We'll go now to Mr. Giorgetti, please.
Thank you very much. I have with me our Executive Vice President, Barbara Byers, who will comment quickly on pay equity. I wanted to focus my comments on employment insurance or unemployment insurance. I still want to call it unemployment insurance because it seems when you call it employment insurance, people compare it to employed. But it's a critically important program in Canada. It's served us quite well, especially in the tough times that we have faced. But today, laid-off workers need adequate benefits to support themselves and their families. Unemployment insurance benefits are spent on necessities. They're not saved, they're not spent on imports, and they're not used to buy stock options. We argue that they're the most effective form of economic stimulus and help maintain the hard-hit economies that we have available to us today. Compared to when we hit previous recessions, REI programs leaves far too many Canadians, especially women and lower wage and insecure workers, out in the cold. In November 2008, this is the government stats, 4 in 10 unemployed workers qualified for benefits. The maximum weekly benefit achievable is $447 today. That's 25% less than in 1996, I add. And the average benefit today is $335. Now, I just want you to put that in perspective, everybody, and I say this with the greatest deal of respect. That amounts to less than $48 a day taxable to support themselves and their families. You, members of Parliament on the Hill, get $81 a day just for meals. Every day you're here on the Hill, taxable. These people get 60% of that to support themselves and their families every day. That's pathetic in our view, pathetic amount of money when you consider what they need to use that money for. I know the minister likes to argue that 80% of all currently employed workers would qualify for EI, but that's not even relevant to the situation. That's if they lose their jobs. But it ignores the fact that job loss particularly affects those with unstable patterns of work, such as workers on reduced hours before layoff or work sharing, as well as part-time, temporary, and contract workers. It also ignores the fact that many unemployed workers qualify for EI for a very short period, but exhaust those benefits. Our Congress has called for lower entrance requirements of 360 hours. We think that's important, very important to be considered. In the run-up to the budget, I want to tell you that many voices, including those of editorial writers, the business leaders, even the Council of Chief Executive Officers, provincial premiers, endorsed our call for major improvements to the EI system. And since 1999, since I've been the President of this Congress, every political party in Ottawa has supported that call at some point in time or another, depending on where you sat in the House, I might add. The minister says that in her statements that she doesn't want to pay employment insurance benefits to workers to just sit around. Now, this is an insult to many workers. More than 250,000 in the last 3 months have lost their jobs. They're looking for work. They're not sitting around. There's nothing out there for them. And we want to tell you that we support the budget provisions as well. And there's been some improvements, including allowing extra weeks, and we applaud that, of course. We support the provisions to freeze EI premiums in 2010 up to 2010 on top of the 2009 freeze. We think that will help stabilize the economy. However, the huge EI surplus accumulated of $54 billion should have been used and taken into account to improve those benefits. I want to also point out that in this budget bill, there is a provision to make accommodations to retroactively legalize the premiums that were illegally collected in this country in 2002, 2003, and 2005, declared illegal by our Supreme Court of this country. And we think this does nothing to rectify the fact that governments collected premiums vastly in excess of much reduced benefits over the years and put that money into general accounts and spent it. We'd like to see immediate repair to this system, and we think the people who paid those premiums are entitled to the insurance they deserve.
You have 1 minute, Ms. Byers.
Okay, I hope your translators and interpreters can keep up with this. I want to speak very quickly about the Public Sector Equitable Compensation Act, and specifically we want to say that this act introduces the notion that women's work in the public sector should be valued according to prevailing market conditions in the private sector, and I would say that's what's got us into this problem, is this question of market conditions already. It asserts a false equivalence between management and the union by making the union bear responsibility for the results of bargaining equitable compensation without restricting management's rights to hire, control information, determine job classifications, or issue paychecks. An employer may fire a worker who files a complaint and have a $10,000 fine, and yet a union that helps a worker make the complaint will face $50,000 fine. And I just want to say finally, in my 60 seconds, that this act really disregards the Federal Pay Equity Task Force report, which came out in 2004, which has been endorsed in one way or the other by all sorts of parties and individuals. And that was a piece of legislation that called for proactive, inclusive, timely legislation. It was well researched. There were many consultations. There were many research papers, and we should have had pay equity legislation in the federal public sector or the federal sector by now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Byers. We'll go to Mr. Damore, please.
Bonsoir, je m'appelle Bernard Damour.
Good afternoon. My name is Bernard Damour. I am the Director of Public Affairs at the Canadian Urban Transit Association.
For the opportunity to speak today. This is a very strong signal that all parties in the House recognize the pivotal role of public transit as an engine of long-term economic growth and environmental sustainability. In that context, I would like to address the recent federal budget and measures to support public transit. Our transit systems were impressed with the size and scope of federal commitments to infrastructure spending. We were also impressed with commitments from the Minister and the Prime Minister that transit was identified as a pivotal sector for the new infrastructure funds. These are important commitments and will, in many ways, be a yardstick against which the success of this infrastructure package is judged. In short, the government will be judged not just on how much infrastructure funding takes place, but more importantly, how well this funding contributes to our long-term economic success. Now, let me be clear. While CUTA was impressed with the size and the scope of the infrastructure package, our transit systems remain concerned that there was not specific long-term dedicated transit funding. Nous estimons qu'il est nécessaire pour le gouvernement canadien.
We believe that it is necessary for the Canadian government to develop a stable and long-term investment strategy in order to meet the needs of public transit if it seeks to maximize the measures that were introduced in the Economic Action Plan tabled on January 27th. In that respect, our association has identified 167 projects in the public transit sector that are shovel-ready.
Public transit projects worth a total of $12 billion, could create over 130,000 jobs in all regions of Canada. I have made copies of the inventory of these projects available through the committee clerk. Canadians are choosing transit at unprecedented levels as more and more people understand the importance of their travel choice in reducing emissions in our cities and communities and in easing traffic congestion. Canadian transit ridership has been trending for an annual increase of 3% annually over the last 5 years. This growth rate is 3 times the general rate of population growth. While we're waiting for ridership numbers for 2008, early indications from our transit systems show that ridership growth will exceed 3%. Canada is currently the only G7 country without a national policy of long-term predictable transit investment. This places the country at a significant competitive disadvantage. The lack of a long-term policy also prevents Canadian transit system from achieving their full potential. Allow me to highlight the bold leadership south of the border that might inspire our collective transit activities moving forward in Canada. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, approved by both houses in the U.S. Congress and signed into law by President Obama, includes $8.4 billion in dedicated transit funding. All federal parties need to come together to support a strategic federal investment in public transit that is dedicated in long term. This could be best accomplished by establishing a new public transit fund that is permanent and predictable in the same fashion as the gas tax fund. Overall, this measure would ensure that a larger share of transit infrastructure investment needs is met to improve accessibility and mobility for Canadians living in urban areas. The most recent report on Canadian transit infrastructure needs has estimated the total requirements over the 5-year period 2008-2012 at $40.1 billion, including both renewal and expansion requirements. As we move forward to build a better Canada for the future, an imaginative, bold federal approach to infrastructure resources for transit will be critical. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go now to Mr. Knight, please, for your presentation.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for this opportunity. Last August, we prepared a brief for you called Canada's Crisis and Advanced Skills. It's attached to your documents, and it's a powerful statement about what was only a few months ago Canada's principal long-term economic challenge. There will be a recovery, and this challenge will come to confront us again. My preoccupation is the recovery should not stumble and fall on the crisis and advanced skills. So a few words about our colleges and institutes of technology where these skills are created. Before the recession, we had lineups of 6,000 students who were turned away from Algonquin College, 2,000 turned away qualified students from Nova Scotia Community College, 4-year waiting lists at many programs in Western Canada. And now what is the situation? Well, it's a whole lot worse because all sorts of people who have become unemployed in the past while and who we perhaps will become unemployed in the future will return to college or seek to upskill their current skills or reskill for a new profession. And who will they be looking to but colleges who already had very long wait lists? In addition to that natural transition, you were kind enough to put $1.5 billion in the budget for retraining over and above existing amounts, and that's terrific. And these folks also are going to come to colleges for the retraining. You're not going to be displaced from GM and probably not going to get a degree in English literature. You're probably going to go to a college because they are the principal skills trainers in this economy. So we're faced with an enormous challenge to manage all of this retraining opportunity and on top of the existing demand for places in colleges. Our institutions are going to have to exercise great creativity. They're going to have to press their facilities into service around the clock potentially, certainly work over weekends. They'll have to rent facilities in all probability. Unused industrial facilities may be pressed into action as well. People with advanced skills who have been displaced from the workforce can also assist as instructors. So the sector is going to have to exercise a lot of creativity. We had called for an investment in colleges, and I'm happy to report that in the past budget, $2 billion was allocated for universities and colleges, which will help our situation. We weren't thrilled with the 70-30 split, 70 university, 30 colleges, because employers are telling us where they have skill shortage, they need 6 college grads for every university grad. That's the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, not me. But I'm not going to complain about this. The employer groups will do that for me, and I know some of them have already started. I was going to talk in my short presentation about Bill C-10 and the problem in that it does not reflect for college and university infrastructure, especially for college infrastructure, the proposal in the budget speech, which said that it could be used, this funds could be used for expansion, and Bill C-10 says no, it's only repair and maintenance. We think expansion is important, but with great assurance from the department and officials in the minister's office, I won't raise that. That gives me a short time to talk about another opportunity for stimulating economic growth in the country, and that is to remind you that the principal employers in the country, the majority of Canadians work for SMEs, small and medium enterprises. Colleges are located in 150 college institutions with 1,000 campuses, and the interface between SMEs and colleges is quite intense. We have been suggesting for some time that 5% of the federal investment in discovery research which takes place in universities should be used to stimulate the relationship between SMEs and colleges for product development, prototyping, commercialization. This does happen without any support, but it could happen in a larger way, and we could support the SMEs where most job creation will happen. We're all concerned about GM and we're all concerned about auto parts, but it's those small industries and small communities where most Canadians work. So there's a big opportunity to take advantage of this enormous penetration of 1,000 campuses and build that relationship. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the future. You gave me an opportunity to talk about that. We'll be back on that issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Knight. We'll go finally to the Conference Board of Canada, please, for your submission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here and share with you our view of the budget. And I should say that I am very much the numbers guy at the Conference Board. We put together an economic forecast, and I'm the person behind that. And so we're looking not only at the policy implications and whether the budget's timing and issues are in accordance with sort of our views, but also maybe bring you some sense of what we feel the longer-term retributions will be or implications will be from the current spending program. Let me start by saying that certainly we were very worried about the economic outlook for 2009 and even 2010, and I think that we were looking for, even before the budget was out, a number of the measures that were actually announced, a lot of infrastructure spending, some tax measures to get money into the hands of households, and other stimulus to try and get us out of this very important recession that we are now facing. The budget 2009 did very much a lot of that, so we were in fact quite pleased to see that a lot of the measures that we had talked about were in there, and we generally gave the budget a passing grade. If we look at the economic impact of the budget itself, we're looking at a number somewhere in the range of between 1 and 1.3% of economic stimulus that we could add to 2009 calendar year. So this is a huge, huge spending program that is coming, if it can get it out there quickly enough, at the right time. And so that brings me to just two issues. I think the budget does do a lot of things to try and get that stimulus out there quickly which is very, very important in the current crisis. But the issue again will be whether we can get as much stimulus as we expect into the economy as quickly as we can. And it is very much a balancing act. If we do tax cuts, we tend to get the stimulus out very quickly, but the impact is lesser. If we do infrastructure spending, which we feel is a good way forward, the impact tends to be longer term, and it's harder to get that money out there into the economy. So a couple of issues with that. When we look at the amount of infrastructure spending and include the provincial and municipal portions, we're looking at $15 billion in this year. We're not quite sure whether all of that amount will get out there. And then last, I think the point a little longer term, if we look at, certainly when we put our forecast together with a fairly robust recovery as we get out into the outer years, we feel that the federal and provincial governments will have a tough time getting back into a balanced budget situation. So we would suggest that we have to look carefully at what measures we are putting in place further down the road to assist in maintaining a balanced budget as we return to potential. And I think at the federal level, it's doable, but when we look at provincial levels of government who are going to be pushing their spending in terms of the infrastructure components that they have to contribute to, we're a little more worried with respect to that. So we've been living very well, if you'd like, with very strong commodity prices in 2008. I think the situation has changed going forward, especially for the regions. So I'll leave it at that on that note. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your presentations. We'll go to questions by members. Mr. McCallum, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, et merci à nos témoins d'être présents.
Thank you to our witnesses for being here this afternoon. I'd like to make a general comment before asking more specific questions. I know that this is rather repetitive for my colleagues because we've already had several proceedings today, but what I wanted to say is this. We are in a full-blown economic crisis. For us, the #1 priority is to make sure that money is injected into the economy as soon as possible.
We do not like at all about this budget, and you have mentioned some of them. We agree with most of those deficiencies, and we could add more. But for us, the priority has to be to get that money out the door. We think this is what one might call a bad Liberal budget, in the sense that it does provide significant fiscal stimulus, and given the number of people unemployed and losing their jobs or about to, we are going to work to pass the budget. And just an hour or so ago, the minister confirmed that the government would not entertain amendments even on things which have nothing to do with fiscal stimulus. So I'd like to mention, for example, to Mr. Georgetti and Mr. Serret, nous sommes d'accord, et M. Ignatieff l'a dit.
We agree, and in fact, Mr. Ignatieff said this several times. We believe that the first priority must be to help the most vulnerable. And it's hard to be more vulnerable than to be unemployed.
Making it easier to get access to employment insurance and working very hard to make less time taken to get the checks out of the door as the top priority. But we're not going to block the budget and bring down the government and cause an election, and to do that, we'll have to do that at some other time. But I guess I'd like to ask Mr. Georgetti. I think we see eye to eye on this, but are you suggesting that that's a big enough deficiency that we should defeat the budget?
Well, it wouldn't take much for me to want to vote against the package itself, because it doesn't help the people that are the innocent victims in this process. Let me put it in perspective. The home improvement program, the one we call the Home Depot program, gets 6 times as much money as the unemployed in this budget. The renovation tax credit. But surely the government sliding in the finding of the Supreme Court of this country that 3 years of illegal taxation happened to Canadian workers is enough to take that measure out of the budget. That's not a budgetary measure or a fiscal stimulus measure. That's a measure that deserves open debate in this Parliament so Canadians can see what the government is going to do to repair what was a finding of illegal taxation. That's a pretty significant finding by our court. To slip that into a budget bill without any debate, to me, is quite harsh in my view.
Okay. I agree with you. I could go on with a litany of other things we don't like, but I'm not sure you quite answered my question. I don't think that necessarily means the best thing to do is to bring the government down, go into an election, delay for several months any sort of fiscal support to the economy at a moment of crisis. But we do have huge concerns about getting money out the door. So maybe I could turn to the case of public transit. There's a list here, $12 billion of fast-track public transit projects. Well, that sounds very nice. And I think in terms of long-run economic success and sustainability, these are exactly what the doctor orders. But do you have any belief that a significant number of these, worth a total of $12 billion, will in fact be funded by this budget?
Well, that's the reason why I said we would like to have some dedicated funding towards public transit, because the government announced $4 billion towards infrastructure, which is okay, but we don't know. There's
just say what you'd like. The point is the budget's out. The act is about to be passed. The minister said an hour ago he wasn't going to change one iota of the budget. So given the budget the way it is there any reason to think that any of these projects will be funded by this budget?
Well, the only thing I can say is we hope. We know that there were some announcements that were made last week, and we hope that others will follow. That's the only thing we can say.
Minute and a half.
Okay. Well, let me now turn to the longer term and the colleges. And we were talking earlier today about the need to build a strong economy for the future and not just to focus on the short run. And the example was given of the Obama budget with many billions of dollars for science and research and technology. And now it was just mentioned $8.4 billion for transit, which is key to sustainability. And I guess one of our major concerns is that we may be having funds for bricks and mortar, but we don't have much in the way of funding either for the brains to serve the economy or for the public transit type ventures, which also promote sustainability. So perhaps to Mr. Knight, who represents colleges, do you agree with me that there's not enough for the brains and colleges are a good chunk of the Canadian brains? What more should have been there?
Got about 30 seconds.
Well, there is funding for the bricks and mortar. It's for colleges, $600 million. What we're going to do with that is try to spend it wisely and quickly. We're really going to work at it and show that we can add value to the economy and demonstrate our capacities and efficiencies and our nimbleness and our dexterity, which is what we pride ourselves on. But there's also $1.5 billion for retraining, and presumably some of that can be used to hire the retired instructors, the displaced folks with advanced skills to do the training. That would be our hope and aspiration. So that money should be out there as quickly as possible with a fair amount of flexibility provided so that we can use it very quickly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. McCallum. Go to Monsieur Laforêt.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors, bonjour.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to all of our witnesses. Now, earlier, I was quite surprised to hear my Liberal colleague, Mr. McCallum, say that despite the fact that this government is not entertaining any amendments, the Liberals are going to vote in favor of the budget. And he's just said that after having heard from all of our witnesses this morning, he realizes that this budget is not perfect and that it does not address all of the problems being raised today. But the government isn't going to accept any amendments, and yet the Liberals are going to vote for it. It's already decided to support it. Now, that that the Liberals would support it is not being questioned, but the fact that they are not trying to improve it is an entirely different issue that is very questionable. I want to turn now to employment insurance. It's almost as though Mr. McCollum didn't hear what Mr. Serre was saying earlier. The measures introduced in the budget pertaining to employment insurance are absolutely insignificant. That the duration of benefits has been increased, but very few people are eligible. And in fact, the rate of eligibility has still not been corrected. I'd like to hear some of your comments on Mr. McCollum's remarks. Mr. Serre, would you like to begin, since you represent the unemployed? It's clear the situation is serious. All economists, commentators, editorialists are speaking out. All orders of government in Canada have spoken out publicly and said that there has to be a relaxation of employment insurance benefits and rules. This was said by the Minister of Labour in Quebec, etc. When the new unemployment figures were released last month, we learned that there was a net loss of 129,000 jobs. What did the analysts say? They said that the sectors that are the most hard hit were the most precarious sectors. There were many sectors in Toronto that were battered. People who are working part-time, who are very hard hit and yet won't be eligible to receive any benefits. Mr. McCollum said that we have to put money into the pockets of taxpayers and citizens. That's right. That's true. Now, I won't get into the debate of reversing certain things, but what I'm hearing on the ground is that this Liberal Party has talked about commitments, and we need firm commitments. Before there was the employment insurance program, the Liberals had promised during their 1994 campaign to boost the program. Now, we are seeking to reopen the channels of communication, but the situation is serious. But we're also making our pleas to the government in power. This government is responsible for the welfare of Canadians. We need to widen accessibility. Now, it's not 82% of people who are eligible to benefits. In fact, 67% of people who contribute would theoretically be eligible, but there are people who contribute but who will not see a penny should they be in that situation. The minister was actually asked very specific questions by Mr. Savage and other members, and he in fact confirmed that the 82% figure was wrong. The ratio that has been used to assess coverage is actually 46%. Before 1996, it was 85%, and I have a problem with that. What about the 2-week extension? Since I was first elected, many people have told me that when they become unemployed, that's one of the first problems that they confront. The 2-week waiting period is actually very detrimental. And they're unable to make ends meet because of the 2-week waiting period, and I think that's something that we need to address. Yes, it does create a gap in the budget. The system was first established in 1940, and it was stated It was provided for a 2-week waiting period. So people had to wait all that time before receiving their first check. A worker, therefore, has to have significant savings in order to withstand those periods. In my office, we've heard nightmarish and horror stories. It's terrible what people have to tolerate, given the red tape and administrative delays. It's awful.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the panelists for coming this afternoon. I know it was short notice and it's late on a Monday afternoon, and we appreciate you being here and providing your information. I'm going to just talk to a few. On the CUDA, I've met with CUDA numerous times, talked to them about transit. I'm actually a big transit supporter and don't necessarily disagree with CUDA's position that national transit legislation is something that we should be looking at in the future. And I've been promoting that since I've been got here. So I appreciate what you provided for me or for the committee. Would you say, what has your organization done with these communities to have an understanding of what is shovel-ready? Have they indicated how quickly they could move on some of these items?
Yes, we sent an email we represent 120 transit systems across Canada, and we sent them an email, and we had some discussions, and we had an indication that the government was going to make some announcements, and we asked them to provide us with a list of projects that would be shovel-ready and that could be done within the time frame of around 2010. Because usually transit projects are long-term. Right. They can be 4 years, 8 years. There's planning, there's all the environmental assessment and all these things. And this is a process. It has to happen.
Right. Certainly part of my concern, following up on the question from Mr. McCallum. Now, last week the Prime Minister and the Premier of Ontario made an announcement with GO on improvement to the GO system in terms of rail in Hamilton, rail along other parts of the system, and I think they finally woke up that people actually drive to the GO train stations, parking facilities at these GO train stations. I don't see an organization like GO in here. Are they part of your organization, or are they separate?
No, they're part of our organization, but sometimes some of our transit members will have different priorities. They will not always share it with us, and perhaps it was a project they were interested in.
So from an expectation point of view, would your members expect to be dealing directly with the federal government to make some of these things happen, or through their municipalities directly with the federal government, or do they believe, are these three-way requirements in terms of the municipality, the federal government, and the provincial government?
Well, we feel that, we should start with the federal government. That's where the funds are. And once the federal government has accepted to fund the projects, then we can start, discussing with the provinces and the municipalities.
Okay, I have a question for the conference board, if that's okay. On your final paragraph, you say the conference board's own forecast is more optimistic than is contained in the 2009 federal budget. So us on this side of the table would use a small c and say that it's a conservative estimate of what where we're going. My frustration, and maybe if you wish to comment, is that we've heard from a variety of folks over the last little while here at this committee, whether it was the head of the Bank of Canada or the announcement from the Bank of Nova Scotia, for example. Things aren't as gloomy as some of the press headlines like to be. What, as an economist, or as looking at this as modeling, I know it's basically numbers, but to me the frustration is that we're hearing things that, hey, let's be positive about what's happening. Let's get started. Let's get this economic plan in place and moving and spending, and things hopefully will come to be. What role does the psyche of the public play in you're estimating where we could be?
That's a very good question, and in fact, part of the reason that there's so much contradiction out there in terms of the forecasts is because of that role. It's very hard to measure what the role of confidence is, and confidence has been very much at play in terms of this cycle, starting with the U.S. economy, obviously, but the U.S. economy has really been in contraction for quite a while. As we know, the recession there started in the beginning of 2008, and what happened between September 15th and October 15th of last year was really a situation where confidence just kind of unraveled. And so that's a very good question, and that's part of the problem and part of the differences in the forecast as we look out, especially to when that recovery will come around. However, when you go back to the basics and you look at an economic stimulus package like President Obama is putting in the U.S., you do have a sense that the U.S. economy is hitting bottom. It's certainly not rosy there, but there are a number of indicators that are telling us that it's trudging bottom. And when you look at the same kind of stimulus for Canada, this is a big spending budget, and this, we know the kind of impact that this has. So my only questions here is, can we get, and I guess part of the questions that have come up, can we get the money out there fast enough, or will it,
right.
Will it be delayed?
Okay. Well, we don't disagree with you, and that's why 1 minute. That's why we're hoping that with support of our colleagues, we can move this through quickly. One last question for the Canada Health Infoway folks that are here. Often as a federal member, we hear from our constituents, Burlington, for example, what are you doing for our hospital? And, the answer is, well, it's provincial. We give a health transfer. It's going up 6% this year in this budget. What could you tell me that I could tell my constituents that why this network, this health network that you've put together, why is it important, this info highway, and what will this money actually do for them?
Let me start off with what the money will do for them. To date, the federal government has given, through Infoway, $2.1 billion. That money has typically been leveraged another $2.1 billion when it's all said and done of jurisdictional funding. Had the first ministers not come together in 2001 and created this national organization, we would be in a stalled situation, and a stalled situation in healthcare is not good. Today, there is empirical evidence to show that anywhere between 9,000 and 24,000 Canadians die every year because doctors actually don't know what medications that they're on and some of the adverse events that are caused. A lot of these patients are injured and land up in very expensive acute care beds. So as we see where we've got issues around access because patients really shouldn't be there, if in fact you give clinicians the information to tell them what drugs individuals are on and to tell them the next prescription that they're going to make, how it's going to react with their medication history, and in fact whether they should be prescribing something else. And then the whole issue around productivity gains. Today, what we've invested, we're showing productivity gains.
Mr. Alvarez, I'm sorry, we are over time here for this session. We might come back to that in a later question. Mr. Mulcair.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
I'd like to begin with Mr. Serret. Earlier, he talked about calling upon the Liberals to make a commitment. Allow me to summarize the last 2 months. At the end of November, there was the fiscal update. The government attacked union rights, attacked women's rights, took away funding from political parties, and this is in the aftermath of the ad scam. And then there was nothing for the economy, and now we're in February. We're dealing with a budget which, once again, attacks unions' rights, attacks women's rights, does nothing for the unemployed. What's changed? The Liberals have won, and so now they're for the budget. I respect you. I respect what your organization does. The government was ready to defeat the government in November on those other issues, but it's clearly obvious that the only change is that the Liberals have now obtained what they were looking for. That's what things are about. There wasn't any change. The Liberals don't have any backbone. The three opposition parties had agreed to work on behalf of the unemployed. So my question to Mr. Serret is this. Should we vote for or against the budget? Allow me to be very clear and unequivocal. What I know is that the Liberal Party of Canada must be involved, must be clearly and directly involved in repairing the damage that was done to the employment insurance program. Since 1996, that system has been cut back. In 2007, when there was the potential of a coalition, we were moving closer towards a solution. I understand you, Mr. Serret, but please answer my question, my very specific question, which is the following. We need three political parties to defeat this budget. So my question to you is this. Should the opposition parties vote for or against this bill, which attacks union rights, which attacks the environment, which attacks women's rights? And obviously, this is in the aftermath of the sponsorship scandal that the Liberals are acting this way, but this budget does nothing for the unemployed. So yes or no, should we vote against this budget? I'm not sure if I can answer you, Mr. Mulcair. I don't know if the Liberal Party should vote for or against. I'm not asking you if the Liberals should vote for or against it. Regardless of one's political affiliations, should they vote for or against it? We need to work relentlessly. We need to move towards repairing the employment insurance system in order to help workers. Thank you, Mr. Serret. My question is for Mr. Giorgetti now. Will you be able to answer the question that was asked by Mr. McCallum? I'll spare you of my prologue to Mr. Serret's question asked earlier, but do you believe whether or not political parties should vote for or against this budget?
I think this budget should be voted down. I think it should be voted down for three key reasons. One, it only achieves 1% stimulus. The government, I was in Washington, D.C. On the G20. Our government agreed to spend 2%. They're only spending 1%. The victims of this crisis are being ignored, Mr. Mulcair, ignored. The women, the unemployed are being ignored in favor of fancy tax cuts and other things that are going to do nothing in the short term to offset the damage done to the victims, which are unemployed Canadians who, through no fault of their own, and I might add through their tax dollars, being used to backstop banks and bail out everything else under the sun, but they can't get their unemployment insurance. For that reason alone, I'd vote the budget down.
Thank you for that clear answer, Mr. Giorgetti. It's greatly appreciated.
Mr. Mulcair, you have 2 minutes if you wish.
J'aimerais commencer maintenant avec Madame Bayer sur la question.
I'll now turn to Ms. Byers with regards to women's rights and equal pay for equal value work. For us, that is the most important part of the bill. The government is attacking a right that is enshrined in the Charter. In your analysis, should we be able to turn to the tribunals in order to contest these provisions? Because the only argument that the government is putting is that things would move quicker than before.
Look, in terms of what this Equitable Compensation Act is even doing in this Budget Act is quite, if it wasn't so desperately awful for women, we would say, you know, well, what's the problem? Because, first of all, they've frozen public sector wages for 3 years. There is no negotiation. But in terms of the Equitable Compensation Act, this is not about equitable compensation. It is not about women getting a fair deal as federal public servants. It is not about women having some access to being able to challenge. This is not a proactive law. This will be complaint-based. This will not compel employers to do anything as a proactive measure. And they won't be doing anything, because if they were going to do something, they would have done it by now, in terms of if they really believed in wage fairness for women workers. We don't think that you should take away people's rights to be able to use the Human Rights Commission or any other rights to be able to challenge this. I mean, look around this room and tell me where the women are. You know, tell me what kinds of wages. And we're talking about the prevailing market forces having an indication. Well, that's what part of the problem is here.
You raised the question of the prevailing market forces quite correctly in your analysis before this committee. But did you also not notice that the government is raising the bar up to 70% of presence of women per call d'emploi? I don't know how to say that in English. And that would mean that the existing rule, the general rule right now of 55%, which allowed you to go after groups of a concentration of women, but at 70%, it's not going to apply to anybody.
It's not really going to. It's not going to apply to anyone. But those that will apply to won't get anywhere in terms of advancement at any rate. So, I mean, it's a huge attack on women's economic equality. And I'll tell you, we feel the discrimination every time we take a paycheck home. Every time.
Thank you for that clear answer, Madam Byers.
Thank you, Mr. Mulcair. We'll go to Mr. Pachetti. Mr. Pachetti, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Merci.
There goes Martha.
Yeah, there goes Martha. Monsieur Damo, juste rapidement pour les questions.
Mr. Demo, very briefly. I just received this pamphlet of your organization. You promote tax-exempt benefits. A few weeks ago, we learned that tax deduction was not at all useful. Do you have any comments on that? Mr. Pachetti? I don't know if there's some confusion. What we promote is deductibility of passes for employers that they can pass on to their employees. In fact, Mr. Obama passed that deduction of $120 per month and raised the deduction to $230 per month. Were you able to note any positive impacts? According to our analysis, it's extremely difficult to measure whether this translated into an increase in use. In ridership, as I said, there was an increase of 15% over the past year, but we don't know if indeed there was a cause and effect, a causal effect rather. Very quickly again. In the budget, there's going to be money invested in public transit. How much? Well, what we are calling for are amounts that are dedicated on a long-term basis for infrastructure. We recognize that the $4 billion is good, but we are calling for specific dedicated funds allocated specifically to public transit. The budget does indicate that transit would qualify, but there isn't any specific language. How much are you calling for? We did not indicate a specific amount, but to give you an idea, last year's budget was between $400 to $500 million per year. And was all of that spent? Were there any agreements on specific projects? Yes, there were agreements with the provinces. And there was money that was specifically allocated. Was it spent then? I understand that it was allocated, but does that mean it was spent? There is a presentation here, an analysis of a series of projects that were unveiled. We've received an update, and there were projects in Windsor, in Quebec City, in Gatineau, and many projects in Edmonton as well as British Columbia where money was indeed spent. Now, even if $400 to $500 million is allocated for the entire country, I see that the City of Montreal has put in requests worth some $1.5 billion. And in fact, this will affect some metro stations in my riding. So I'm wondering if this amount is actually going to be higher. I think we're looking at a $2 billion figure. I don't see how we can even dig a hole with $100 million. Yes, you're right, because we did set our needs for 2008 to 2012, needs that were worth $40.1 billion. These projects are ready to go starting tomorrow morning, and they can be completed by 2010. We asked transit networks to identify short-term projects only.
For recovery. I understand that the recovery seems to be dependent on the success of the economic stimulus package. But what I'm having difficulty understanding is the rate of growth that we're expecting. So whether it happens at the end of 2009 or at the end of 2010, it's the percentage that I'm having trouble with. Depending on which economist you speak to, he's giving you 2 or 3 numbers, and he or she is all over the place.
Okay.
So it's like 3 sides to every story.
Briefly, Mr. Antunes.
Sure. Well, I think the problem, again, is by the time any of this money gets into the economy, we're looking at perhaps the second quarter to the second half of 2009. So when you look at the 1.3% that I was mentioning, you have to spread it over that period. And then the second component is, can we get all of that in as quickly as...
Economic stimulus package does work.
Okay.
The growth will be 3%.
Thank you.
Not this year, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pichetti. We'll go to Monsieur Carrier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bienvenue. Bonjour.
I was quite struck by the presentation made by those who represent workers and those who are facing difficulties. Thank you, Mr. Serret. Thank you, Mr. Giorgetti. I also agree with you. Those who are in the most need are those who are losing their jobs and those who are not being treated fairly. Now, I'd like to hear each of your respective opinions. If the Minister of Finance had consulted you before establishing his budget, and in light of what you know about the Liberal Party, which will be supporting the budget, despite the fact that they are that they have many reservations and questions about the budget. What do you think about our democratic system and the fact that we are at the mercy of a minority government, and that is simply because we want to prevent an election or something else, they're voting in favor? So how do you see the future, given the dynamics between those two parties, given the fact that at the end of the day, they both are agreeing on a budget that does not meet the needs of Canadians? So that question is for Mr. Serret and Mr. Giorgetti, and I have another question about PACE equity for Ms. Byers, which is a very serious matter. That matter was introduced in a Budget Implementation Act. It is going to repeal very legitimate rights, fundamental women's rights. So those are the 3 questions with respect to, firstly, consultations that did or did not happen, and how you foresee the future of our democratic system.
Au niveau de la consultation, nous directement,
we were not directly consulted by Minister Flaherty, but the FTQ, the Federation of Quebec Workers, were involved in the pre-budget consultations. The minister was in Montreal, I think at the beginning of January, and he was there with industry heads. There was also a union head, and in fact he was the only one from the union sector. Minister Flaherty talked about what he was going to propose, the tax cuts, and he had answered the questions of business leaders, but he never asked us any questions. He never asked us if we wanted those measures. And in answering our demands to boost the employment insurance program, we didn't hear anything. We weren't consulted. And we were trying to press upon the point that we were making today, this afternoon. Now, this is almost equivalent to a veto. This government, a minority government can almost apply a veto right. We stated publicly, and we had signed letters. We sent op-eds which said, bring back the Conservatives to the opposition. Now, you're very well organized. Everyone is mature. I know that we're dealing with adults. I think it's up to you to play the parliamentary games that you're engaged in and not go into the wrong direction. But what is clear is that our goal is to restore the employment insurance system. We need a majority for that. If the government falls now or later, we have to address that social issue. It has to be translated in our words and in our actions. Mr. Carrier, you have 30 seconds remaining.
Well, let me be clear. The only two Labour groups consulted after the economic update and before the budget was the FTQ and the CLC for a total of 58 minutes. That's the only workers' consultation that happened. The only time we were consulted is when they thought their jobs were at risk. I wish everyone would stop posturing and take care of the honest, hardworking Canadians who have been affected negatively by this crisis, and that's the unemployed. All of the requests that we've made to modify and enhance the unemployment insurance system cost less than the home improvement program that this government put in place. That's the equivalent. If you get down to that, we would actually applaud this budget and say you looked after the people who deserve to be looked after, Canadian taxpayers who, through no fault of their own, became victims of this crisis.
Thank you. Ms. Byers, you wanted to, well, very briefly, we're over time.
Okay. Well, you know, this is typical of pay equity issues get this much, while all the other important issues which are important.
I don't determine how much time a witness takes.
I just want to put out here that, you know, that this is a huge attack on people's ability to use the Human Rights Commission to advance their economic equality. And this isn't about helping anybody in terms of the current economic crisis. This is, in fact, about hurting people. And this is about women who put their money in the communities, who spend their monies where they live and where they work, and them not having access to even over a long period of time advance their wages. And I mean, that's an absolutely critical issue. This is not about pay equity. This is about pay inequity, and that's exactly what's going to happen to women's wages in the federal sector.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Kraft.
Mr. Chair, I have two quick questions, and if there's time left over, I'll share with my colleague. One for Mr. Knight and one for Mr. Alvarez. Mr. Knight, I was really interested in your proposal of a possibility of 5% of the R&D allotment. Certainly, I've seen locally at the community college level, I can even tell you personally, several examples of R&D collaboration and even incubation with independents as well as the various sources. So could you just elaborate a bit more on your initial comments on that, and potentially even I asked you to give some serious thought to making a formal proposal and bringing it forward, because I think it's an idea that's well worth consideration.
Well, thanks for that support. As you know, there's a vast amount of discovery research in universities, which is really where we spend our money. A lot of it's pretty esoteric, and it's unrelated to the short-term economy at any rate. We see a real opportunity to reinforce these relationships between small businesses and colleges, which are already quite active, and in fact some colleges have substantial applied research funding through private sector contributions. But there needs to be a public sector support to this, because in fact college instructors are not there for the purpose of conducting advanced research. They're there to teach. And when you put them on a project, you pull them out of teaching, and there needs to be some way of ensuring that we can do the teaching while supporting the SMEs who create most of these jobs in the country and who we depend on for economic growth.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And Mr. Alvarez, when I take a look at the dramatic escalation in healthcare costs back in 1975, roughly $300 a person, give or take a little, now close to over $3,000 a person, the exponential growth in that. When I listen, though, to your statistics, though, and the return on investment that you've been able to, your organization has been at the Health Infoway over the years in terms of the return on investment in terms of patient treatment and in dollars and in controlling costs and in creating jobs. And I flip that around and I say, well, that's fine, but we have maybe 25 to 30% of this country doesn't even have access to broadband, and they're not even connected. Well, we've obviously made a significant investment in this budget to do just that. But assuming that goes forward and that we finally have a lot of these rural areas, quote, connected, how quickly and what impact do you believe the Canada Health Infoway could have on those rural areas?
Thank you for that question. Actually, we're already having a significant impact on those areas. For example, 80% now of Canadians don't have an X-ray film anymore. These are now digitized. Which means that they can be, wherever they're taken, the X-ray film is taken and digitized, it can be read from everywhere else. And so we've now got 40% of our radiologists providing access to remote areas, which has never happened before, which is very, very necessary. And what that means is where they don't have a radiologist or they don't have a specialist in a rural area, it can basically provide not only efficiencies, but you don't have to move the patient, and a diagnosis can be made a lot quicker. That, together with the aspects of telehealth, which are now very prevalent, certainly from our territories to the south, and we've made enormous progress in that area. Healthcare is Canada's largest information-intensive industry. It's 3 times the size of the Royal Bank of Canada. Yet, when you think about the technology we apply to it, it's been incredibly small. It's still a paper-based system, and paper is not only inefficient, quite frankly, it's downright dangerous, and it actually kills.
Thank you. Bob?
Seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very quickly, I want to touch on work-sharing arrangements, and I'll direct my comment to Mr. Dorgetti. In the weeks leading up to the budget, I met, and other members of this committee met with many groups across the country. In my area, Mississauga, the #1 request from employers was assistance for extension of the work-sharing program and changes to make it more easier to set up these arrangements. I've been trying to promote in my area to every employer the information that they need to know to save jobs before they lose them, and I wonder if you could comment on how important it is to implement these work-sharing measures as soon as possible.
Well, we would agree with you completely, with one caveat, is that one of the risks of work sharing is you diminish your hours, your qualifying hours for unemployment. And what usually happens is people go into work sharing, they lose their hours, and when their work sharing ends because of that, they become unemployed. They don't have enough hours to qualify. That's part of the problem with the system. But given the option, most of our people will take work sharing than see their friends laid off in the short term. But there's a risk with it.
And employers want to keep their skilled workers.
Yeah.
It's very important, and this is a great opportunity we have to save the jobs before they get laid off in the first place.
Right on.
Thank you. We'll go Mr. McKay, final round.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses. First of all, to Mr. Anthony. Stimulus is all the rage these days. It seems like we're jamming everything that you can possibly imagine into stimulus. At times, however, it does seem it's a little like taking a bucket from the deep end of the pool and putting it in the shallow end of the pool. And you got to wonder at the end of the day what you've got other than one enormous debt. I'm particularly concerned about the flow of fiscal stimulus. Because even if we rush the budget through, as the minister has wanted us to do, and it starts to move, and you do all the rest of this stuff, you're really, to be realistic, this time next year before you're actually going to see even, projects getting going, and that's with the best of intentions all the way around. By that time, your projections are that the recession is, if not over, it's close to over. So what did we accomplish?
That's a good point. Thank you for that. I think we have to be aware that we don't want to be injecting extra stimulus, certainly at the time when the economy starts to recover and strengthen. And we are among the more optimistic, if you'd like, forecasters in terms of seeing a V-shaped recovery rather than perhaps a U. And the latest one I heard was a bathtub-shaped recovery. So I think this is a good point. The idea here in this budget, I think, is that we are trying to get money as quickly out as quickly as possible and then sustain the level. So we're not adding necessarily as we get into 2011, certainly in 2012. In those years, the stimulus should be coming off. The other aspect is that we're, I think, going to be able to sustain what we talked to earlier, a little bit of confidence in the economy. If people do feel that there's something being done that longer term, that we're looking at fiscal stimulus that is longer term. We saw, for example, the impact of those tax credits in the U.S. that dissipated very quickly because they were one-time payments that weren't sustained, and I think they're now trying to avoid that in the package that is occurring south of the border.
I can agree with you in terms of the merits of doing a lot of this stuff. Infoway is, I mean, it's an excellent example of things that should be done. The folks here have suggested a number of projects, things that should be done, but I just wonder at the end of the day whether you are in fact preparing the ground for an ongoing structural deficit from which our country will not be able to extract itself.
Well, that's one of the points I mentioned early on. I think this is a big budget. There's some big spending measures. And if we look at the issues, I mean, over the last number of years, government revenues have been stronger than expected year in, year out. And that's because this little thing called the income multiplier has been stronger than expected over those years. In other words, usually you get about 1% or 1.2% increase in revenues when income increases by 1%. Over the last number of years, that's been much, much stronger than that because of income shift, if you like, and a lot of revenues coming into this country. As we look longer term, I think that's going to go back to where it should be, back to its normal level, so 1 to 1.2. And if you do that, you do see a deficit that's sustained over the next 4 or 5 years.
Okay, thank you. I'll shift to Mr. Knight. First of all, you're unhappy with the split, and you're unhappy with the fact you can't put new projects. You can't build new stuff. So if you got the opportunity to rewrite and you were duking it out with the universities and the other claims on this $2 billion, how would you rewrite it? And say hello to Ann Buller when you're,
yes,
you're rewriting it, please.
Well, given the demands of the economy, we view it as a bad economic decision. Half of the college applicants are university grads who didn't get jobs, who come to college to be trained up so they can be employed. So why, in a time of economic stress, why would you make such a massive investment in institutions which are, in many provinces are losing students? I mean, why would you do that We thought it was a bad choice. But let me say this, and this is really important, colleges haven't been recognized in a budget for a decade, and we were really happy that we were there. That's a shift, I think, in perception and an acknowledgement that colleges do play an important role in the economy. So there was a positive reaction in that respect. Is it perfect? No, but it's a start. It's a start, and we'll be back again explaining why we're so important.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McKay. Thank you to all of the witnesses here today for your presentations here today and your responses to our questions. Members, we will adjourn the meeting, and we will see you back here at 7 o'clock. Thank you.